Hello! First of all, I'd like to say I'm so sorry for the amount of time it took for the upload of last night's video. Now, I'm uploading it at 6:30 and it's still not working at past 7 o'clock. I don't know what's wrong with it. It sometimes comes back with an error message, taking too long to do, but I promise you that it will be on there between 6:30 and 7:30 every night. Ready for bedtime. I want to say thank you again for all the lovely messages and all the likes and all the comments. And it just, I like seeing them because I enjoy doing this and I don't get the chance to do it in the classroom at the moment, where I love to do it. And yeah, so the only thing I would ask, please share the videos, not for my sake, but for all the other children that are out there who are going through a pretty rubbish time at the moment, so they're able to watch this as well and listen to it and listen to the story and enjoy it as well. So yeah, thank you. Now, last chapter, Luke was going on some holidays with his grandmother to Bournemouth, and he just had 2 mice as presents, and he's training them at the moment to do acrobats. Now, obviously the hotel manager, Mr. Stringer, wasn't a very nice person, and he allowed him to keep the mice, but Luke wanted to find a way of escaping so he could be able to train them properly. So he goes into the ballroom. And he's come across a party that's going to be coming in there shortly called the Royal Chartered, I can't remember, Protection of Children, Protection of Cruelty to Children. Okay, so I think that's correct. I'm not sure, I can't remember. See if you can remember. And yeah, so they're about to come into the room whilst he's training, but there's something not quite right. Did you predict what might happen? Let's see. If you're all sitting comfortably, let's begin. Chapter 6. The Meeting. Now that the manager had gone, I was not particularly alarmed. What better than to be imprisoned in a room full of these splendid ladies? If I ever got talking to them, I might even suggest they come and do a bit of cruelty to children preventing at my school. We could certainly use them there. In they came, talking their heads off. They began milling round and choosing their seats. And there was a whole lot of stuff like, "Come and sit next to me, Millie dear," and "Oh, hello, Beatrice. I haven't seen you since the last meeting. What an adorable dress you have on." I decided to stay where I was and let them get on with their meeting, while I got on with mouse training. But I watched them for a while longer through the crack in the screen, waiting for them to settle down. How many were there? I guessed about 200. The back rows filled up first. They all seemed to want to sit far back from the platform as possible. There was a lady wearing a tiny green hat in the middle of the back row who kept scratching the nape of her neck. She couldn't leave it alone. It fascinated me the way her fingers kept scratching away at the hair on the back of her neck. Had she known somebody was watching her from behind, I'm sure she would have been embarrassed. I wondered if she had dandruff. All of a sudden, I noticed that the lady next to her was doing the same thing. And the next one. And the next. The whole lot of them were doing it. They were all scratching away like mad at their hair on the back of their necks. Did they have fleas in their hair? More likely it was nits. A boy at school called Ashton had nits in his last term, and the matron made him dip his whole head in turpentine. It killed the nits all right, but it nearly killed Ashton as well. Half the skin came away from his scalp. I began to be fascinated by these hair-scratching ladies. It's always funny when you catch someone doing something coarse and she thinks no one is looking. nose picking, for example, or scratching her bottom. Hair scratching is very nearly as unattractive, especially if it goes on and on. I decided it had to be knits. Then the most astonishing thing happened. I saw one lady pushing her fingers up underneath the hair on her head, and the entire head of hair lifted upwards all in one piece. And the hand slid underneath the hair and went on scratching. She was wearing a wig. She was also wearing gloves. I glanced swiftly around the rest of the now seated audience. Every one of them wearing gloves. My blood turned to ice. I began to shake all over. I glanced frantically behind me for a back door to escape through. There wasn't one. Should I leap out from behind the screen and make a dash for the double doors? Those double doors were already closed, and I could see a woman standing in front of them. She was bending forward and fixing some sort of metal chain around the two door handles. Keep still, I told myself. No one has seen you yet. There's no reason in the world why they should come and look behind the screen. But one false move, one cough, one sneeze, one nose blow, one little sound of any sort, and it won't be just one witch that gets you. It'll be 200. At that point, I think I fainted. The whole thing was altogether too much for a small boy to cope with. But I don't believe I was out for more than a few seconds. And when I came to, I was lying on the carpet, and I was still, thank heavens, behind the screen. There was absolute silence all around me. Rather shakily, I got to my knees and peered once again through the crack in the screen. Chapter 7. Frizzled like a fritter. All the women, or rather the witches, were now sitting motionless in their chairs and staring as though hypnotised at somebody who had suddenly appeared on the platform. That somebody was another woman. The first thing I noticed about this woman was her size. She was tiny, probably no more than 4.5 feet tall. She looked quite young. I guessed about 25 or 6. She was very pretty. She had a rather stylish long black dress that reached right to the ground, and she wore black gloves and came up to her elbows. Unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a hat. She didn't look to me like a witch at all, but she couldn't possibly not be one. Otherwise, what on earth was she doing up there on the platform? And why, for heaven's sake, were all the other witches gazing at her with such a mixture of adoration, awe and fear? Very slowly, the young lady on the platform raised her hands to her face. I saw her gloved fingers unhooking something behind her ears. And then she caught hold of her cheeks and lifted her face clean away. The whole of that pretty face came away in her hands. It was a mask. As she took off the mask, she turned sideways and placed it carefully upon a small table nearby. And when she turned round again and faced us, I very nearly screamed out loud. That face of hers was the most frightful and frightening thing I have ever seen. Just looking at it gave me the shakes all over. It was so crumpled and wizened and shrunken and shriveled. It looked as though it had been pickled in vinegar. It was a fearsome and ghastly sight. There was something terribly wrong with it. Something foul and putrid and decayed. It seemed quite literally to be rotting away at the edges. And in the middle of the face, around the mouth and cheeks, I could see the skin, all cankered and worm-eaten, as though maggots were working away in there. There are times when something is so frightful, you become mesmerised by it and can't look away. I was like that now. I was transfixed. I was numbed. I was magnetised by the sheer horror of this woman's features. But there was more to it than that. There was a look of serpents in those eyes of hers as they flashed around the audience. I knew immediately, of course, that this was none other than the Grand High Witch herself. I knew also why she had worn a mask. She could never have moved around in public, let alone book in a hotel with her real face. Everyone who saw her would have run away screaming. "The doors!" shouted the Grand High Witch in a voice that filled the room and bounced around the walls. "Are they chained and bolted?" "The doors are chained and bolted, your grandness," answered a voice in the audience. The brilliant snake's eyes that were set so deep in that dreadful, rotting, worm-eaten face glared unblinkingly at the witches who sat facing her. "You may remove your gloves," she shouted. Her voice, I noticed, had the same hard metallic quality as the voice of the witch I had met under the conker tree, only it was far louder and much, much harsher. It rasped, it grated, it snarled, it scraped, it shrieked and it growled. Everyone in the room was peeling off her gloves. I was watching the hands of those in the back row. I wanted very much to see what their fingers looked like and whether my grandmother had been right. Ah, yes. I could see several of them now. I could see the brown claws curving over the tips of the fingers. They were about 2 inches long, those claws, and sharp at the ends. "You may remove your shoes," barked the Grand High Witch. I heard a sigh of relief going up from all the witches in the room as they kicked off their narrow high-heeled shoes, and then I got a glimpse under the chairs of several pairs of stockinged feet, square and completely toeless. Revolting they were, as though the toes had been sliced away from the feet with a carving knife. "You may remove your wigs," snarled the Grand High Witch. She had a peculiar way of speaking. There was some sort of foreign accent there, something harsh and guttural, and she seemed to have trouble pronouncing the letter W. As well as that, she did something funny with the letter R. She would roll it around and round her mouth like a piece of hot pork crackling before spitting it out. "Remove your wigs and get some fresh air into your spotty scalps," she shouted. And another sigh of relief arose from the audience as all the hands went up to their heads and all the wigs, with the hats still on them, were lifted away. There now appeared in front of me row upon row of bald female heads, a sea of naked scalps, every one of them red and itchy looking from being rubbed by the lining of the wigs. I simply cannot tell you how awful they were, and somehow the whole sight was made more grotesque because underneath those frightful scabby bald heads, the bodies were dressed in rather fashionable and rather pretty clothes. It was monstrous. It was unnatural. Oh heavens, I thought, oh help, oh Lord, have mercy on me. These foul, bald-headed females are child killers, every one of them, and here I am imprisoned in the same room and I can't escape. At that point, a new and doubly horrifying thought struck me. My grandmother had said that with their special nose holes, they could smell out a child on the pitch black night from right across the other side of the road. Up to now, my grandmother had been right every time. It seemed a certainty, therefore, that one of these witches in the back row was going to sniff me out at any moment, and the yell of "Dog's droppings" would go up all over the room, and I would be cornered like a rat. I knelt on the carpet behind the screen, hardly daring to breathe. Then suddenly I remembered another very important thing my grandmother had told me. "The dirtier you are," she said, "the harder it is for a witch to smell you out." How long since I last had a bath? Not for ages. I had my own room in the hotel and my grandmother never bothered with silly things like that. Come to think of it, I don't believe I'd had a bath since we arrived. When had I last washed my hands or face? Well, certainly not this morning. Well, not yesterday either. I glanced down at my hands. They were covered with smudge and mud and goodness knows what else besides. So perhaps I had a chance after all. The stinkways couldn't possibly get out through all that dirt. "Witches of England!" shouted the Grand High Witch. She herself, I noticed, had not taken off either her wig or her gloves or her shoes. "Witches of England!" she yelled. The audience stirred uneasily and sat up straighter in their chairs. "Miserable witches!" she yelled. "Useless, lazy witches! Feeble, fribbling witches! You are a heap of idle, good-for-nothing worms!" A shudder went through the audience. The Grand High Witch was clearly in an ugly mood, and they knew it. I had a feeling that something awful was going to happen soon. "I am having my breakfast this morning," cried the Grand High Witch, "and I am looking out of the window at the beach, and what am I seeing? I am asking you, what am I seeing? I am seeing a revolting sight. I am seeing hundreds, I am seeing thousands of rotten, repulsive little children playing on the sand. It is putting me right off my food. Why have you not got rid of them?" she screamed. "Why have you not rubbed them all out, these filthy smelling children?" With each word she spoke, fleck of pale blue phlegm shot from her mouth like bullets. "I'm asking you why!" she screamed. Nobody answered her question. "Children smell!" she screamed. "They stink out the world. We do not want these children around here." The bald heads of the audience all nodded vigorously. Them child, a week is no good to me. The Grand High Witch cried out. Is that the best you can do? We will do better, murmured the audience. We will do much better. Better is no good either, shrieked the Grand High Witch. I demand maximum results. So here are my orders. My orders are that every single child in this country shall be rubbed out, squashed, squirted, squitted, and fritted before I come here again in 1 year's time. Do I make myself clear? A great gasp went up from the audience. I saw the witches all looking at one another with deeply troubled expressions, and I heard one witch at the end of the front row saying, All of them? We can't possibly wipe out all of them. The Grand High Witch whipped round as though someone had struck a skewer into her bottom. Who said that? She snapped. Who dares to argue with me? It was you, was it not? She pointed a gloved finger as sharp as a needle at the witch who had spoken. I didn't mean it, your grandness, the witch cried out. I didn't mean to argue. I was just talking to myself. You dared to argue with me? Screamed the Grand High Witch. I was just talking to myself, cried the wretched witch. I swear it's your grandness. She began to shake with fear. The Grand High Witch took a quick step forward, and when she spoke again, it was in a voice that made my blood run cold. A stupid witch who answers back must burn until her bones are black, she screamed. No, no, begged the witch on the front row. The Grand High Witch went on. A foolish witch without a brain must sizzle in the fiery flame. Save me, cried the wretched witch in the front row. The Grand High Witch took no notice of her. She spoke again. An idiotic witch like you must roast upon a barbecue. Forgive me, oh, your grandness, cried the miserable culprit. I didn't mean it. But the Grand High Witch continued with her terrible recital. A witch who dares to say I'm wrong will not be with very long. A moment later, a stream of sparks that looked like tiny white-hot metal fillings came shooting out of the Grand High Witch's eyes and flew straight towards the one who dared to speak. I saw the sparks striking against her and burrowing into her, and she screamed a horrible howling scream, and a puff of smoke rose up around her. A smell of burning meat filled the room. Nobody moved. Like me, they were all watching the smoke, and when it had cleared away, the chair was empty. I caught a glimpse of something wispy white, like a little cloud fluttering upwards and disappearing out of the window. A great sigh rose up from the audience. The Grand High Witch glared around the room. I hope nobody else is going to make me cross today, she remarked. There was a deathly silence. Frizzled like a fritter, said the Grand High Witch. Cooked like a carrot. You will never see her again. Now we can get down to business. Wow. That was very scary. But I absolutely loved it. I love the Grand High Witch. That is why she's one of my favourite characters. Have a go yourself. Why don't you try practising the Grand High Witch's accent and have a go yourself? Remember, you've got to roll your r's like rrrr, and you've got to replace all the words that begin with W with V's. Witches of England. Why am I talking to you like this? I shall see you tomorrow for the next chapter, which is, let's have a look, Formula 86, Delayed action mouse maker. I can't wait. See you soon.